Our guest today is Executive Vice President of Communications for the Philadelphia 76ers, a former Vice President of Public Relations and Athlete Marketing at the UFC, Philadelphia Business Journal's 40 Under 40, an avid fisherman, if I ever met one, but most importantly, dad to Lucy, Linny, and Sonny, my friend Dave Sholler.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. And as a reminder, you can watch the video version of our podcast and see Dave's smiling face on our website, neverloseyourcape.com. Dave, thank you so much. I know you're so busy, so I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Of course, one of the cool things about working in this industry is you get to make lifelong friendships in addition to business relationships. I think that's what we've developed here, Lisa. And it's fun, especially in the, I hope, the tail end of a pandemic, that we can start talking about, things we've learned, things that matter, and ultimately the things that make us tick.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd like to start each episode. You are now a grandfathered in basketball player because you work at the 76ers. So we like to start every episode with our warm-up segment. So 3 rapid fire questions, 2 from me, and here we go. What are you binge watching right now?
That's a great question. I have gone through so much binge watching. I'm watching a show called Meat Eater. It's about outdoor survival and hunting and fishing. As you guys know, I'm a bit of an outdoorsman myself. So I've been binge watching that on Netflix. That's been really good. And I said from a young age that I would be a professional chef if I wasn't in sports. So I watch a lot of Food Network. I probably watch more Beat Bobby Flay than anyone in the world. So I spend a lot of time binge watching my guy Bobby Flay.
That is so fascinating. Never knew that about you.
Yeah,
What was the best thing about quarantine 2020?
that's a great question. And I try to reflect on this every day. I spent 8 years of my life, my professional career at the UFC on the road, sometimes upwards of 30 weeks a year. And the NBA is obviously an aggressive and fast paced industry. I've had a chance to have dinner with my family more times in this stretch than I ever have since my children were born. So just being able to sit with them every night over a bowl of pasta or whatever we're having and hear about school and watch my son grow up. I know this has been really hard on a lot of people, but those moments are what I'm going to take away from it.
A lot of fun facts you didn't know about Mr. Schaller today. I love it already. All right, we're going to let you start here. So bring us back to your childhood when you were a little boy and what your childhood was like.
No, I appreciate that question. I am very cognizant that I should be a statistic, and so should my 3 siblings. We grew up in a trailer park in South Jersey, the children of an addict, a hardcore addict. My father was an alcoholic, he was an opiate addict, and his actions, he was really gripped and overwhelmed by addiction, and it put us in some really, really tough spots. We faced poverty and eviction and a lot of the challenges that people face in this world that are not popular to talk about. And for me as a young boy, my escape was always this dream that I could one day work in sports. I learned pretty quickly by the age of 12 that I wasn't going to be tall enough to play shortstop or fast enough to play point guard or aggressive enough to play left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. But I knew there was a pathway for me to channel my love of sports because sports was for all of us a real escape. It was a way to escape the addiction. It was a way to escape the abuse. It was a way to escape the things that we saw as a kid, as kids. I grew up like a lot of folks really early. I was helping care for my siblings from the age of 15 on. So as I look on it now, I recognize the statistics suggest that children of addicts growing up in trailer parks usually repeat the cycle. I was fortunate to have a lot of incredible people who supported me, teachers, coaches, family, friends, things like that, who made sure that that did not happen.
Where are you in your birth order?
I'm the oldest, so I have a younger sister and 2 younger brothers, and to me, next to my children and my wife, my greatest accomplishment has nothing to do with the UFC. It has nothing to do with the NBA, although I'm proud of that. But both of my brothers are PhDs, and my sister's a successful businesswoman. For them to have been able to overcome what they overcame, and for us to get to where we've gotten, to me, it just, again, I don't want to sound cliche, but the statistics were not on our side. And to see them flourishing and succeeding in their industries is something that just pumps me up.
When you were a kid, when did you realize, okay, what we're going through is not a normal childhood?
It's a great question. Um, you know, my dad at his core was not a bad person. He wasn't a bad man, but he was gripped by addiction and he was gripped by mental health issues. And that combination of those two things were a recipe for disaster, frankly. I think I knew around the holidays, relatively young, 7, 8, 9, when my mom would struggle. And my mom was a hardworking woman. She worked 70 hours a week as a waitress. She would wake up with the sun and come home with the moon. Um, and she worked her tail off. But I remember a lot of holiday times, the pain on her face, just trying to grind it out. And it triggered me in recognizing that what we were going through, the scratching, the calling, the trying to make ends meet, was not normal. You know, growing up in the situation that I grew up in, you heard a lot about finances, but through a completely different lens than maybe what kids hear about now. Like, I always heard about money and finance as a have not. We didn't have it. We couldn't do this, we couldn't do that because of our circumstance or because of the situation my dad was in. So I think I knew from a relatively younger age that our situation was pretty unique.
Now, you said at 15 you started taking care of your sisters and your brother and your sisters, your brothers and your sister. Do you remember a time when you were a kid where it was really, really low, where you felt like, I don't know how we're going to get out of this?
Yeah, I do. So I was, and as you get older, you kind of forget like how exactly old you were in the moment. But I was somewhere between like 10 and 11. And our school bus stop was right at the corner of where the trailer park entrance was. So it was always embarrassing for me to get off the school bus because all of my peers, I tried to hide how I lived. But every day at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, I was reminded, and so was my whole class, of like where I came from. So I remember pulling up one day to the bus stop after school, and there were police cars surrounding my house. So here I am, like a preteen, young, impressionable, care what my peers think, and there's every local police car in town surrounding my house. So the walk from the bus stop to my house was probably 40 yards. It might as well have been 4,000 yards. That's what it felt like, because I felt like as I was walking off the bus, the entire bus was just watching, and they all knew. You could tell the police were at my house. And as I got closer, the police were removing my dad from our house. His addiction had gotten to the point where my mom had said enough is enough, and she had kicked him out, and he didn't want to leave, so police were called. And I remember at first they were going to take my dad in, then he complied, so he grabbed one of our bikes, and as I'm getting closer to the door, I can see him getting on the bike, and he rides right past me. And as the same time the bus is pulling away, so my dad's leaving, the house is surrounded, and I'm 10 or 11 years old, like trying to put on a happy face, trying to put on a bright face. And I didn't see my dad for a really long period of time after that. He had bounced around from shelters and inpatient and outpatient. My dad tried a variety of things to get clean and sober. And the story that sticks with me the most is actually the story that I think about a lot today. It's a matter of perspective. as was often the case at times with my parents, they did reconcile. My dad did eventually come home, and we had to go pick up my dad. He was staying at the Atlantic City Rescue Mission, which is the largest homeless shelter in the area that I grew up. And I'll never forget the day we had to pick him up. It was a cold, biting, like northeast winter day. You guys probably both know what I'm talking about, where it kind of cuts through your jacket and kind of hits you at your core. And we had this old Chevy Astro van that we loaded up in the trailer park, and it was me. I was 10 or 11. It was my sister, who was the second oldest, my other brother, and then my youngest brother, who was like in a car seat around infant age. And I remember Serafina and Lisa, like that day driving to the rescue mission and being resentful of my youngest brother because he was clueless. He was a baby. He was in his car seat and he was laughing and he had this big smile on his face. And I remember it was like the first time in my life where I actually started to feel anger, like real, like adult anger of the situation. And I was like, why do my friends at school have like nice rollerblades and backyards and, I forget what the game system was, Sega Genesis, whatever it was. Like, why do they have those things, and why are we continually fighting to keep the lights on? But it was that drive to the rescue mission that sticks with me today. And it was a matter of perspective, because as we pulled up to the steps of the rescue mission, and I'll never forget this, it stays with me. It's something I think about before every NBA game and before every UFC event. As we pull up to the steps of the rescue mission, there was a young African-American woman on the steps of the rescue mission with her children. And they looked in similar age to us, but the kind of fear and uncertainty in their faces is something I'll never forget. And the woman was clutching a blue leather duffel bag, like a faded bluish black duffel bag. And I later come to find out that they were there because they were out of options. They were there. They apparently had fled an abusive situation, and they ended up on the doors of the Atlantic City Rescue Mission as a family because they were completely out of options. They didn't have family. They didn't have resources. They had to end up at a homeless shelter to simply survive. And as painful as it was to have to go there and pick up my father and go through the process, I remember that moment, that blue duffel bag, that woman, the look of despair on the people's faces, because I said, I'm driving back to a trailer park, but I have a Chevy Astro van and I can dribble a basketball up and down the uneven pavement in our trailer. I had more things than these folks who were on the doorsteps of a rescue mission. I remember thinking to myself, no matter how angry you are, no matter how bad you think you have it, that was the first lesson for me where I realized it pales in comparison to other things people are going through. So to feel sorry for yourself, to feel down, to allow yourself to get down a pathway where maybe bad habits are formed, you have to keep in mind that there are a lot of things in our lives, as hard as it gets, that we can be thankful and feel blessed for.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a incredibly moving story.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that we all have things that almost, especially as children, that we can't unsee and that they just stick with us. And that's pretty powerful that woman's face, as being a mom myself, my God, the only thing, you're a dad, the only thing you want to do is take care of your kids. So obviously what you're talking about is not easy. This is not an easy childhood. And you're also have this unintentional but real pressure of not only yourself succeeding, but your sister and your brother succeeding. So when you're 10, 11, 12, 15 years old, what motivated you to, now listen, we're talking about a young boy, okay?
Yeah,
A
right,
young
right.
mischievous boy, okay? So what motivated you to behave? What motivated you to get good grades in school? Because you don't end up where you are without getting good grades in school and being smart and behaving.
Yeah, it's probably the part of the story that I had the hardest time reconciling. Like I don't know why I didn't end up the way my dad did. And some days, Lisa, like I feel guilty about it. Like there's almost like a weird pressure, guilt of like breaking the cycle. But I think for me, at a young age, whether it was a higher power, whether it was my grandfather who always served as a positive role model, whether it was seeing how hard my mom worked, yet still was quote unquote failing, trying to get by on a waitress's salary. In my heart, I did not want the cycle to repeat itself. And I felt like there was only one thing I could control in that moment, which is how hard I worked and the type of energy and attitude I carried. And I tried to figure out how to channel that anger and that resentment into something positive. And whether that was getting lost in a school book or staying extra time playing street hockey or accompanying my sister to basketball practice, whatever it was, I tried to get lost in things that I felt like I could derive real value from. It's weird for me. A lot of the greatest lessons that I learned in life are from my dad. And I realize how awkward that can sound when you talk about a raging alcoholic and an addict and someone who struggled so mightily. But sometimes the greatest lessons are for me have been learned in like what not to do or how to handle things differently. But I think to get back to the core of your question, it was just vested in this belief that if I did not want to repeat the cycle, I had to channel these emotions and get distracted in something that could be channeled positively.
That's great. So your toolkit in adolescence was think of the things you can control and take yourself to that place that you can control in a good way and use that to drive your good grades, to drive your good behavior. Take the things that you can control and sink yourself into them. And I gotta ask, because this is such a dark moment for you as a kid. Did you guys pray together as kids? Did you ever get to a point where you felt so scared or so alone that you guys prayed together?
That's a great question. Religion is something that has always been an interesting predicament for me because as a part of my dad's recovery through our whole childhood, um, I'm pretty sure I've been baptized in every church, and I'm not even trying to be funny. Like, Catholicism, Protestant, Lutheran, Baptist, like I felt like I've gone to every church because as a part of recovery, they always try to connect you with religion and a higher power and a source of meaning and purpose. So I remember being a kid and like going to all these different churches, and I learned two lessons. Like, one, the people who can find that connection with mind, body, and soul and spirit and a higher power, I understand it and I get it. I also understand that in many ways church can be a microcosm of life. There's a lot of people that utilize it for great, and there's a lot of people that don't practice what they preach.
Mm-hmm.
So to think about it, yeah, there was a lot of times where I remember specifically talking with my sister because she was a little bit older. We're separated by 2 years. My other brothers, the gap is a little longer, of just like, how do we break this cycle? And is there someone up there looking out for us? So, yeah, I mean, I do remember those moments of saying the rosary with my siblings or whatever it may be. I have an admittedly weird connection with religion now. I'm far more spiritual than I would say I am religious. I do believe in a higher power. I do believe in a greater force. I'm not ready to tell you today whether that's a God or Buddhist or like I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm okay with that. For a longest time, because of all the different forms of religion I saw as a part of my dad's recovery, it just left me kind of spun around. And
Mm-hmm.
imagine trying to reconcile that as a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. You've got hormones running through your body, like the
Right.
normal things you go through. But yeah, in those moments, the moments that it would get the hardest, the things that I miss, frankly, are when my siblings and we would ball up big pair of like wigwam socks, if you remember wigwams, and we would pretend they were basketballs. And my brother and I would like call out Iverson to the rim in Mark Zumoff's voice, our play-by-play guy, who I now consider a friend and mentor, and I work with every day. Or we pretend we're Randall Cunningham or Donovan McNabb or whatever. So I'm not saying this for effect, but I have this routine before every game where whether it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes, I try to get as much time as I can. I'll walk out, and I did this at the UFC, and I'll just be there for a minute. I'll just be in the moment. I'll step on the hardwood, or at the UFC, I would go right up next to the cage and just think back to those moments and go like, damn, this journey has not been a straight path. It's not been easy, but in the crunch time moments that we went through, I think back to like us balling up those wigwam socks and pretending we were playing basketball in a narrow hallway of a trailer park. And now I'm in the 20,000 seat Wells Fargo Center, a part of the resurgence of one of the most storied brands in the NBA. Like, I get chills talking about it. And I don't say it to brag. I say it as a moment of like, I should not be here. And I'm here, and I'm going to ride it until the wheels fall off.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show you there, for me, it's the Lord. For you, it might be a higher power, but there is a plan for you. And I think that when you're in your darkest moment, it's hard to see that. But I think it's amazing that you take the time to actually, even if it's a minute, like you said, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, to just sit in that emotion and soak it in and reflect back. I think that that's just so powerful. Now, what you clearly have this rags to riches type story, if we're going to put it in a box. But what I love so much, and the reason why I wanted to bring you here today, is that your story actually takes a turn. So you went to college, you were successful in college, you had a very successful career, to the point where now, like we mentioned, you're an executive vice president at the 76ers. You have an amazing wife, Tiffany, who I know and love. You have three beautiful kids, three healthy kids, which is such a powerful thing. And your story doesn't end there. You like you said, you pretty much can buy anything you want to buy right now. You can provide for your children the way you want to provide for them, but that's not the end of your story. Talk to me a little bit about that.
No, it's not. And over the last couple of years, I haven't felt completely right. And by right, I mean, to what you said, like I bought a house 5.7 miles away from the trailer park I grew up in the area. I said as a kid, like Babe Ruth style, that's where I'm going to live. I'm calling my shot. I got the truck I want. I got all the fishing gear I could ever ask for. Like, I have healthy children. I have an amazing wife. I have the dream job. But I still felt this darkness. Still felt a sense of guilt. I would still question my worth, and it got dark for me. Not dark to the point where I felt like harming myself, but dark where I just felt like I'm going to struggle to live like this in my own head for a long period of time. And it was hard because for me, my traits, my characteristics that I always wanted to be aligned with were like unflappable. I wanted people to see me as unflappable. I don't want people to think that I could be rattled. I wanted people to see me kind of appropriately hardened, if you will, emotionally, like where you could throw anything at me and I would tackle it head on. But it got super dark for me. And I started to suffer some anxiety related, depression related things that I realized, in fact, after talking to a trained professional, were things that I've been dealing with my whole life. I was just mature enough now to understand that there was something deeper going on. And it's interesting because as I go through the process and I talk to trained professionals and I let my guard down and say, I need help, you recognize that a lot of the things that got me here, the coping mechanisms I developed as a kid that powered me through college and through my early parts of my career, are now the same things that maybe are stunting my growth as a man and as a dad and as a father. It's weird because there's this permanent chip that's been on my shoulder for 36 years that I love. Like it's created this fire in my belly, and I was afraid to let it go. Frankly, I was afraid to figure out who I was without it. But I also realized that the depression and the anxiety that I was going through were going to prevent me from making the next jump as whatever, not even a professional, as a dad, as a husband, as a friend, as a colleague. Um, so yeah, the last 2 years in particular, I had to you run in this business. You run from city to city, state to state, event to event, game to game, and sometimes you lose yourself in that. Maybe you skip a dentist appointment, you end up with a cavity. Maybe you don't go to the eye doctor, your prescription gets worse. But for me, taking care of your mind has been an important maturation process for me because I needed to, frankly, share my story, and I shared it because I needed to hold myself accountable. I needed to feel whatever level of embarrassment I was feeling. I needed to just like rip the band-aid off and say, this is who I am. Because I think a lot of people see my story and they're like, wow, what a success story. Like, he's made it. And maybe I have, maybe I haven't, I don't know. But like, that's only part of me. I needed to be able to share it and see Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan and all these like prominent athletes have a far bigger platform for me saying like, hand up, I'm not good every day. So that's kind of how I netted out where I netted out.
I think it's one thing, to ask or know you need help. I have a two-part question, which you're not supposed to do, but do you think it was harder to get to the point where you said, I need help, in being this tough man that you've been your whole life and realizing that? And then what got you to that place where you said, I'm throwing my hands up. I can't do this by myself anymore?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I've never answered that question publicly, but I'll do it here. You know, you have to sometimes like shed your cape, as we talk about on this podcast. Like sometimes you have to actually take the cape off and realize that your superpowers can be artificial if you're not being true to yourself. And there was a particular moment where, and Lisa, like I've been having these my whole life. I just didn't know what they were, but I was having a full on panic attack. I didn't know what it was. Like here I am, college educated, graduated top of my class, executive at the UFC, executive at the NBA, and I'm just thinking I'm going through like something that in my mind I've relegated to like, you're just being weak, like toughen up. But in reality, I remember going through a couple of summers ago, like a full-on panic attack where I was on the floor and my wife walked in and she's, what's going on? Because I was hiding this stuff from her. And I just couldn't function. Like my limbs felt heavy. My heart was, I just could not get to a point where I could get myself up off the dirt, which I had been doing for 33 or 34 years prior. And it was at that moment where I realized like I can't be the professional I want to be or the person I want to be if I'm gripped by that. And it was, frankly, I needed a dose of embarrassment of like, yeah, this is who I am behind closed doors, like laying on the floor trying to get my act together. And that to me was like the moment where I've been having similar things like that for my whole life. I just hid them from the world. But I hated the way I felt. I hated the stigma that I had even given myself. I just realized I had to be stronger than that.
And I really want you to hear me say this, and that I think it takes so much strength to ask for help and to sit and suffer and sort of hide even from yourself. That is way more of a weakness than to stand up and say, I need help. What true strength that is. And I love the way that you said, this podcast is obviously called Never Lose Your Cape. And you said it beautifully, in that you can either, for myself and for you, like you can either take your cape off or you can have it ripped off. That's and right. You have to decide which way you're going to go. And sometimes it sneaks up on you and it just gets, I feel like mine was slowly getting torn a little bit each time. And then for me, the embarrassment and the shame was getting laid off. that was what, all these things happened to me in 2020 that slowly put these little holes in my cape. And then all of a sudden I get laid off with 500 other people and mine's just ripped off. And the amount of shame and embarrassment and lack of hope that hit me was so difficult, And now for our listeners out there that feel like they're in this dark place that you talk about, where they're at this point of where they need help, seeking medical professional help, therapy. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I've gone to therapy for many, many years. I'm a big proponent of talk. I'm a person, I'm not introverted, I'm extroverted. I like to talk out my emotions. It always makes me feel better. It makes me feel heard. So is there anything aside from maybe therapy and sharing your truth with, like you said, your wife, like what are some other tools today that you use as an adult that really helps you persevere through these challenges?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I appreciate the insight that you shared. I think for me, you have to let go of whatever emotion is, whether it's guilt or you feel selfish. You have to prioritize every day yourself. You can't be a great mother, father, spouse, colleague, whatever, if you're not in the right mindset. And it's funny, one of the people I've grown incredibly close with here at the Sixers, who's become not only a big brother, but like an incredible friend and mentor, is our general manager, Elton Brand. And he was the first person here at work that I felt comfortable sharing it with at an executive level and just saying, like, I'm going through some stuff. I'm getting help, but I'm telling you, one, because like I trust you, and two, like there's going to be some days where at 9 a.m. I might not be on that call. I might be taking care of myself, or I might miss, X, Y, or Z meeting because I need to prioritize what I'm doing. And he and our whole leadership team has been, I've shared it with different leaders, and they've been so incredibly supportive, especially through a pandemic. But you have to prioritize yourself, and it might mean that you miss something. You might not be able to be at every single meeting or every single event. But for me, having honest dialogue with the people that I'm close to and saying, like, hey, there's some days where I just need that half hour to work out, or I need that half hour to like do some sort of gratitude exercise within my own walls, inside my brain. I think, to kind of go back a step, there were moments where, whether it was on the way home from work or on the way home from the grocery store, I would find myself like sitting in parking lots, empty parking lots, for like 15, 20, 30 hour, and not really sure what I was doing there, but you would just feel like the hamster wheel in your head was and you couldn't form like exactly what you were feeling. But with the help of like a trained professional, I'm now spending more time of like actually feeling what you're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
especially as men. Like, we as men, especially in the business of sports, like we carry around this like facade, this false cape of like toughness and unflap.
Masculinity.
Yeah, it is. And it's hard enough in the social media society we live in to be like vulnerable. Like, you go on Instagram and everyone's living the most charmed life and the greatest pictures, and no, of course I didn't use a filter on that. Like, it's just a different world that we live in. And I think being able to peel back the layers, be comfortable in your own skin, flaws and all. I'll say that again, like flaws and all, and allow yourself to feel. You can't be the optimal dad or mom or spouse if you're not dealing with the own stuff that's going on in your mind and in your life. And you can feel guilty or selfish all you want, but you carry that weight around. It's kind of like working out. Like, you go to the gym the first time, the 10-pound weights feel heavy. You're like, all right. But you keep working out, and the next week you're up to 15s, and then you're up to 20s, and you're up to 25s. The problem with like a depression and anxiety is you actually keep those previous weights on your back. So like every week it gets heavier and heavier, and you might think you're advancing, but like meanwhile you're just getting drugged further and further into deep water. In some ways, for me, it felt like a slow drowning. Like the water started at my toes, and every week I'm like, now it's at my shins. How to get to my belly button? Like now it's at my chest. All of a sudden, it's up to your nose level, and you're not sure what to do. So much of my journey is trying to make sure, from a depression perspective, that water doesn't get back to my nose level.
Somebody told me this thing once, to be like a duck, which is you're cool and collected and calm above the surface, but below you're pedaling like hell to just
Yeah,
stay afloat.
I
And I
love
kind of
that.
like that. So I love your toolbox. So your toolbox as an adult now, prioritizing yourself, which
Yeah,
is huge, being honest with yourself, with the loved ones around you, with the people you work with, practicing gratitude exercises. I love that. I think that's so important. Um, my husband struggles with depression and alcoholism, and I was having a really hard, as a spouse, as a partner with someone that's struggling, it can be very hard. It's hard. And I had reached out to someone, and it's interesting when you reach out to your family or your close friends, they sort of like are on your side a little bit. They're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," or whatever. And
right.
I reached out to a very neutral person, actually, from someone I had met in an Al-Anon meeting, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a support group for family members or close friends of people with alcoholism or addiction issues. And I reached out to this person, and the first thing she said to me, "Have you made a list, like, on paper, of all the things you love about him?" And I just thought to myself, like, I'm calling this person and I'm basically blowing up because I'm so frustrated with what's happening. And that one thing that she said to me, like, totally chilled me out. And instead of like focusing on your anger or your frustration, to take a moment and focus on gratitude. And I love that you talked about doing a gratitude exercise in your head. I think that can be really powerful. And then lastly, you said to just live in your flaws, all your flaws, and be who you are. And I just love that. I'm so thankful for you for sharing that with all of us. I
For
have
sure.
one last question. If you had to give one message of hope that you want other people to know, that our listeners out there, what's your one message of hope?
Uh, I would say that a biggest part of our journey in life as individuals is embracing a phrase that I've was gifted when I was a young boy, and it's stuck with me today. And maybe it's a little cliche, but I promise it's applicable, which is get comfortable being uncomfortable. The true moments in my life where I've grown as a dad, as a husband, as a friend, as a colleague, whatever, has been when I've been faced with moments where I was incredibly uncomfortable. Early in my UFC career, Dana White, the president, who's a friend and a mentor, and I owe so much to, he would invite me to meetings with like top executives in the company. And I was not a top executive in the company at the time. And I remember going into those meetings and going like, I am way over my head. And in reality, Dana was just trying to get me comfortable with the idea of being amongst other leaders and being comfortable speaking up. Um, that stuck with me professionally. On the personal side, like it is really uncomfortable to look your boss or your spouse or your siblings or whomever in the eye and say like, I'm not good. I need help. I can't do this by myself. So embracing that real growth comes from uncomfortable circumstances. It's funny because the juxtaposition of comfortable and uncomfortable seem pretty clear, but you may think you're comfortable with something until you're really pressed and all of your values are checked. For me, getting and embracing uncomfortable as a pattern of growth for myself has been really important. Whether it was a tough conversation with a spouse, we've all been leaders in companies where you have to have that tough conversation with a colleague or coworker. But like embracing that life's greatest moments sometimes come out of like really uncomfortable and sometimes unfortunate circumstances. Can you embrace those moments as an opportunity to grow or get better? Because if you don't, I feel like you pile up a lot of things you don't want to deal with. And then you're staring at the mirror and you're like, I don't know, even know where to start. Personally, professionally, spiritually, religiously, like you just have this list of things. So again, being more cognizant of who you are, who you want to be, and recognizing like none of us are perfect. That was the toughest part for me in this entire journey. Is like I'm the trailer kid who done good, and now I just expect that like everything I went through in the first half of my life is just like gone, right? It's gone because I have a cool house. Like it's gone because I drive a nice truck. And like, no, you carry these things with you. And I think Lisa and Serafina, the last thing that I wish I would have done earlier, it's like you actually don't have to have quote unquote mental health challenges to speak to a professional. Sometimes it's just good, like you said, Lisa, to like talk to somebody independently about things you're going through, gain a new perspective, and have somebody tell you, like, hey, have you thought about looking at it this way? Just like you did with the story of writing down the things you love. We're all so smart because Google tells us we are. Like, sometimes you just got to take a step back and be vulnerable, be real with ourselves. And I think that to me is just part of the uncomfortable nature of life. And embracing that, I think, will set you far closer to the path you want to be on than letting that stuff pile up.
That's so important. I love that you say that. Like, don't wait. You don't have to be at rock bottom before you talk to somebody.
For
You know, I
sure.
remember early in my career, when my husband and I were at the same company, we worked opposite hours, and we met with someone just to be like, how do we strategize this to like get on the same schedule and have a relationship when we're not together? And like that wasn't even close to rock bottom, but we knew enough to know that we wanted somebody else's perspective. We wanted maybe some different tools in our toolkit to help us just figure stuff out. And I just love that. And Dave, I am so, so thankful for you
Of
for
course.
being here and being vulnerable with us and sharing your stories of perseverance. They certainly mean so much to me, and I know it will mean so much to our listeners. And for all of our listeners out there, if you have any further questions or comments for myself or for Dave, please visit our website, neverloseyourcape.com, and send us a note in the contact us section. And as a reminder, to see the video version of this episode, you can visit neverloseyourcape.com. Thank you so much, Dave. I just appreciate you so much. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your stories. And it is always a treat when I get to see your face.
Likewise, I appreciate the time. Let's do this again.
Yes, I love it. I love it.